Hey, everybody. I am Lauren Delisa Coleman. We are still deep into interviews during the Blackstar Film Festival held annually in Philadelphia, PA. We're doing a bunch of them virtually, and I am really excited to bring you this next one. I have Bronte Velez with me, who is the filmmaker behind Between Starshine and Clay. Bronte, let's get into it. First of all, welcome to Film.io. And please give us a quick synopsis of what this film is about.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
This short film takes place with our collective Led to Life in Oakland, closing out an annual march to reclaim the radical king with a group out in Oakland called Anti-Police Terror Project, who works towards demilitarizing the police and holding police terrorism accountable and reimagining community safety in Oakland. The film takes place on this evening where we held a ceremony to close that march and transformed guns into molds that reflected the stars that were above Oscar Grant the evening he was murdered 10 years prior. So it takes place in that evening, in that ceremony, and bringing the town together in Black prophetic traditions. And then it kind of almost, it dances between us being in the wild in Point Reyes, California, and kind of imagining the earth or the wild in consort with what we're doing in the city. So that's the film.
It's really, really powerful the way that you're bringing together a number of different elements. Before we get into the film itself, though, I was hoping that you could give a little bit of context and maybe a little bit of backstory about Lead to Life, because as we were talking a bit offline, it seems to be that the organization is using film to kind of drive the brand, if you will, or, kind of just what the mission of the organization. And when I saw it, it reminded me of like back in the day when BMW was one of the first to use films, right, to drive an automotive brand. You're one of the first that I see, using film to kind of drive, awareness around something, kind of social impact. So could you talk about your specific involvement with Lead to Life, and then just kind of the larger goals and aims of Lead to Life, and how you guys decided to use film really to drive the mission? Because I think it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it is pronounced Led to Life.
I'm sorry.
But it does look like Lead to Life, and everyone assumes it's Lead to Life.
Yeah.
Because it looks
LEAD. Yeah. In my defense, people, it is LEAD.
Everyone says Lead to Life, which we didn't really think about that. And I love that because it is also about being led in that way. And we're thinking about, we're a Black and queer collective that is transforming guns into ritual objects, into tools, to offer ceremony for Black folks who've been impacted by state violence and environmental racism. So we're thinking about also land that has been impacted by trauma and the way that reverberates onto Black people and the intersections of harm against Black folks and the land that's also look like Indigenous folks in the land. And reweaving connection with nature and land, and just like healing our trauma around connecting with place and the history and the wake of enslavement in the United States. So we've hosted ceremonies in Atlanta, where I'm from, for the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. We predominantly host our work in Oakland now. We're about to host a ceremony in Puerto Rico next month with a Black Puerto Rican collective. So we collaborate with folks who are directly working in community, other forms of community safety, security, and security with being our relationship to the land and repairing relationships to the land. So we work with organizations that are doing that. And we kind of come in as artists and creatives to produce these miracles of just like, what is it to see a crucible on fire and to be in that transmutation that is often not available, something that scholar and artist Free Egunfemi calls commemorative justice, that there's these moments where we're always in the wake of trauma and pain. and we're not creating those portals of time to let ourselves be impacted. So our work is about allowing that impact to happen and the transmutation. And the film aspect, I'm the co-founder and creative director of Led to Life. And I love movies. And we had a movie done for Led to Life before, a short doc about our work in Atlanta. And I, as a creative director, I wasn't a part of that. I love that film, Saratni, but I wasn't a part of how that story was told. And I was like, I'm not into this like talking head stock that is like pulling on just on stories of Black death. I really want to show what happens in our ceremonies, which is there is something otherworldly. It can't be told in this kind of linear narrative. And for me, cinema permitted that space to kind of show the things we also couldn't show in the ceremony and bring people into that space who didn't get to be there. So we'll continue to do this with our work of like, how do we have these local intimate events? And then how do we share those stories to a wider public? Yeah.
So I find this so amazing because, I mean, this is not the first film for the organization, but is it your first film as a filmmaker? And if so, whatever the first one was, how did you kind of make that transition? Because I heard you say that you love film, but it's another thing kind of creating it, right? So how did you kind of get up to speed? Because I'm sure there are, viewers who will be watching who might find themselves in that same position, right? That they want to use film as a medium to be able to drive some type of messaging, but maybe being a bit intimidated because they don't have a filmmaking background, or at least not a formal one.
Yeah, I don't have a formal filmmaking background, but I had as a producer, I can feel what needs to come together to weave a story. And I'm a co-director on this project. So on the evening of the ceremony that we hosted on MLK Day in 2019, where we transformed those guns into those stars, I was like, oh, right, we got to have filmmakers. I hit up someone I met at a park in Oakland, Joel Wanek, a cinematographer. And then I hit up, actually someone reached out to us, I think, Mateo Inoosa, who is another filmmaker of that evening, to film the ceremonies. And Joel was supposed to do like a short doc where that could be more of like a nowness piece or just like a brief kind of short doc piece that really tell the narrative. Whereas then we wanted this other piece. We had some tree planting work we were going to do in Oakland and some pilgrimage work. So Mateo, the vision was there will be this other piece that's more of a video poem. And things just kept evolving. The second part didn't happen. And then I brought on a friend, Med Aldao, who's a filmmaker who I've intimately worked with as a dancer. Me as a dancer, her filming me. And I just really trust her ability to film ceremony. So we collaborated to think about how does it dance between these scenes at the ocean and in the forest to weave another story. And she was the editor on that process. And we co-wrote the vision, and all of the audio is from the evening. And we just had a lot of material to kind of think about what wants to go where. Yeah.
That's just amazing. I mean, I have like kind of so many different questions. I have to rein myself in, but I don't know whether to ask first what led you to start Led to Life, or how you kind of, because each filmmaker who's kind of working on a documentary or a documentary of sorts tends to always have this issue of like, okay, but what do I keep and what do I, kind of edit out? So I don't know. Why don't you pick one of those two questions first and then, go for the next? Because I'm just really curious, I think, about, was there something personal that happened to you or friends or family that made you say, you know what, I need to start this organization and we need to change things? Or was it really just the larger, I guess, cultural issue?
Yeah, it was personal and cultural. I had a friend who was killed in Atlanta when he was 21 and I was maybe 19, I want to say, or 20. And he was killed by a 14-year-old, both
No,
black
way.
kids. And he was killed on a bike path in Atlanta. And I just held it with me in my spirit. Not only his death, but also his this baby who was brought into this initiatory, violent initiatory moment to hurt another young person. And a friend sent me, not in relationship to this, a bike path in my, I want to say it was my junior year of undergrad, this bike path that was like a memorial to Vincent van Gogh, or like an ode to Vincent van Gogh, that was his Starry Night Sky, but it was on a bike path. And it was a glow in the dark bike path. And I just was like, I wonder if the bike path had just even looked different in terms of just when your attention is different, when your spirit is invited to take other cues, like what is interrupted around our relationship to violence, and how does design in public space change our affect and change our spirits and just the choices that we make. So I, in my undergraduate, was thinking about critical geography and Black feminist placemaking, and I was thinking about X's death. And I was also thinking about this young boy and his incarceration and his, the ways that Black children committing harm are not afforded the same care and attention to why they're doing that harm. Like, it's not the same as Dylan Roof, killing 9 people and us asking, or people asking, what happened to this person to do such an atrocity, and to actually really afford that to a child, to be like, what is going on that this child murdered someone, a 14-year-old. So it was really about my relationship with Black children and protecting Black youth's imaginations, and also thinking about initiatory work that is alternative, rite of passage practice and commemorative work, and how we haven't commemorated the legacies of slavery in this country. There has not been like deep, rigorous acknowledgement of that wake. And so some of that is kind of like, and looking at how our current racial terror lynching and this current ways that also what someone called brother named Dr. Sean Ginwright calls persistent traumatic stress environments that are, living in the wake of slavery. We need commemoration, and we need to acknowledge the ways that white supremacy has become a public health crisis for all people. I mean, it also is really impacting white people and descendants of European folks. So I just kind of wanted to think about how to bring my art practice into interventions, and that's public intervention work. I also was a copy editor for a Mexican artist retrospective, Pedro Reyes, who has a body of work called Palas por Pistolas and Disarm, where he is transforming guns into shovels, transforming guns into instruments. So it was thinking about how to pause, an artist's work that could go deep for a long time, where he did a one-off, he didn't do a one-off. He's done multiple things with his Palas por Pistolas work, but just to stay with his meme of transforming a gun into the otherwise, and see what happens when we just linger there for a little bit. So gratitude to Pedro Reyes and Xavier Arnold and his mama, Nicole Villafane. She was really a part of our first ceremonies in Atlanta, and we got to plant a tree at her home and at the site where he was killed.
Wow, it's just so major. Oh, you're working on this project. I mean, or rather this entity like all day, every day, correct? This is it's not like a side project. This is your main focus during the day. Did you raise funding for it? Like, I'm curious just how you've been able to sustain it as well as, create the films and more.
Yeah, that's a great question because it's like, who gave money to do this stuff? I would not have been able to even like imagine that I could do some things at this scale without something called the Spiritual Ecology Fellowship. So when I was coming out of undergrad, someone sent me this fellowship run by a group now that's called Emergence Magazine. Very beautiful work around the intersections of spirituality and ecology. And they created this inaugural fellowship for folks between the ages of 22 to 30, 10 people that they would invest resources in to make bodies of work or projects at the intersections of spirituality and ecology. So I proposed a number of projects. Like at the beginning, we were kind of developing them. It was like an incubator over 9 months. And we had mentors and we got to go on retreats. And another person in the fellowship, Kyle Lemley, who was a urban forestry project manager in San Francisco, he wanted to do ceremonial tree planting work. And I wanted to do a Black church food security project in Atlanta, thinking about the transition of church space that's not being actively used for food justice. Actually, that's what I wanted to do with the guns work, the guns to shovels work. And somehow through that time, Kyle became the program director, I became the creative director, and we did our ceremonies we were funded to do our ceremonies in Atlanta and Oakland through the Calliopeia Foundation. And they are the ones who are funding the Spiritual Ecology Fellowship. And I'm grateful I had he will let me say this, a young white man, queer white man, Jewish man, who knew to ask for more money because we were only allotted $10,000. So I was like, I'll suffer and I'll stress out and I'll figure it out. But he was like, your visions are going to cost, that's going to cost $40,000. And I needed that kind of acumen to start to see, if I want to have that vision, I need that kind of scale. And it was scary when we first got our first grant. I couldn't believe no one else dared to ask for more. He was also the only white man in the group. And there's something interesting about that. Just that knowing and the dignity to be like, and the entitlement to be like, I deserve more.
Right.
It costs more. But ever since then, I know the value of things. And I also know the way that film can mobilize resource because it's been really difficult, to explain work like what we're doing. When we have a small team, we have 4 people now on our team, and we're kind of in person, in the flesh, in spirit. And it's really hard to communicate what we're doing. And media is a very different thing that can be funded. That kind of ritual storytelling so I am like not worried now that we have this project. I also know the ways that it can leverage not only support for Led to Life, but also redistributive justice for the families that have been impacted by state violence that we work with, because people love movies and there's so many dumb movies that make so much money. And where does it go?
Very true. Very true. Well, I think this is amazing. And I think it's interesting that you, kind of speak about somebody else who's on the team who is Caucasian. But I think that's the beauty of like diversity. We're using diversity and inclusion as kind of code words for like have somebody of color on your team. Yeah. But I think it also means what it actually really means, which is diversity. So that means a diversity in age, in, kind of household income the background of that, academics or not, so that you can be able to pull on different levels to think in different ways. Like you said, I mean, if he hadn't said, no, we need more money, then that's just what, you need to be able to have. And that might only come out of a particular, personal experience. So
True.
I think it's great that you note that, because, other filmmakers who are listening might, be able to be well served by hearing that. And it's not always the other, this way. It can sometimes be, that way.
Yeah.
If you are of color, having other types of colors included, right? Because it just makes the project richer. So to kind of go back to my question and about, projects being so rich and wonderful, how did you kind of decide what to keep and what not to keep? Or because it is a ritual, was that any easier in saying, well, I need to show this from beginning to end, otherwise it won't make sense to the viewer or whatever? Or did you still struggle with, elements to keep as you went along with editing?
Yeah. We first thought about one of the producers, Hasmin, and I. My friend Med was actually, I think, in labor the day that we had the ceremony, who's the co-director and editor.
Oh, wow.
So she wasn't at that ceremony to know what had happened. So we thought about what are those really seminal moments during the ceremony that were really powerful. And we kind of just combed through the footage from both. We just combed through the footage of one of the folks, Joelle, and we just kind of put in the time signatures, and we were like, this is what happens in this moment. And we suggested them to Med. It was hard to decide. And then Mateo, the other filmmaker from that day in Oakland, Med is who combed through his footage and decided on some of those scenes. And it was pretty hard because there was a lot of beautiful imagery. I'm so grateful that Mateo knew to get the audio from the soundboard, because we weren't considering, archiving the sound, or really even just we weren't tracking that this film that exists now was even going to be here. So there was some really just lucky steps from the filmmakers who were there to do these pieces we weren't sure about. There was a scene I can share about scenes that were really, that I thought were so powerful that we didn't end up fully using. There's a scene where this white queer pastor who organizes in collaboration with Anti-Police Terror Project in Oakland, there's a scene where someone is rubbing them on the back, and they are just so impacted that they fall to their knees and they are worshiping. I mean, they were really surrendering, and it's just such a powerful scene also to see a work that is about Black liberation also impact other communities, and to know that it's also about you. And I felt them receiving how deep it was and all of the entangled legacies. And Med didn't like that there's a shadow from the camera guy on the person when they get on their knees. And it's not, it wasn't the most, it's kind of a grainy shot, the shadow and the light right there. It doesn't look that good, but it was such a powerful, quiet moment for me. And, there's a moment where we see them wipe their face and wipe their eyes and their tears, but you don't see that moment where they fall to the knees. So I think about that image a lot. I'm trying to think we got a lot of, I think, pretty much our strongest images. Some of the things I regret that aren't in there, we were trying to decide around the narrative. And this also happened with the Saratni film I was mentioning about our work in Atlanta, where it's do we have every mother who came up and with so much, they didn't have to come to this thing and speak about the irreconcilable loss of their children. And they didn't have to bring a gun to the furnace to do this work. And that was a lot. Some of them, I remember one mom, her son had just passed. Like it was, she was really, it was very fresh. And we don't have all of the audio of each, it's not a full expose of the whole evening. So, those are things that were choices to not hear every person share their story. And those are things that we know are there, and we felt them, and the people who were there knows that those were invoked, and those were things we acknowledge in the credits. But yeah, that was a part of it too, of like, do we want this to be about death? Or do we want this to be about death, and also about life, and also about the decomposition of laying harm to rest, and that death and that decomposition. So we made some hard choices, but I think the final is really, it feels really, really strong. We also end up adding something that I made with Med in 2017 that wasn't a part of any of this. So the film kind of began even in 2017. There are scenes of me buried in the earth, and I'm coming out of the earth at the beginning of the film. And those scenes, we didn't know what that was going to be for, why we just went to the forest and did that. And it ended up becoming just a really beautiful aspect of the project. And it became a deep ancestral part of my life, because I found out some things about my grandmother and a really traumatic experience she had gone through that I had never learned about, because my mom saw the images of me coming out of the ground. So there was a lot of profound things that happened, profound experiences that happened in the making, on like unspeakable, level.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, whenever you're dealing with something, spiritual, you don't know where that's going to go. That's both the beauty of it and also a little bit of the apprehension around it, right? I mean, I think it's the same thing when, people were working on poltergeist and stuff and said all those weird things happen. Once you open up, whether it's for higher consciousness or lower, you can't control those things, right? So I just find the work that you're doing, so intriguing, and continued success with it. I guess, just really quickly in closing, do you have, or what might be your strongest tip maybe for, filmmakers who might be bridging this gap between something that is around social impact and film, or just kind of, entering into the filmmaking space from another part of the creative space? What could you maybe share that has helped you maybe be a little bit more calm about it, or, just to feel a bit more confident in it? What are some of your go-tos?
Yeah. Thank you. On a spiritual and somatic level, I would suggest, not moving in scarcity around time to hold. If you're going to go do deep work, to make sure that you think about an abundance of time. I know, like, our scenes where we're going we're at the ocean and in the forest, we didn't have a lot of money. So we did a one-day shoot. And there was so much coming up. And I did have a ceremonist there. There was someone holding space, but there were little moments of just not closing when we got to go catch the sunset now. And now someone has gotten pulled over by a park ranger and is out of their car, who left early, and we didn't bless. And we're having to pull over and make sure this person's good. And accessibility and ableism. We didn't think about one of the elders who was going to be there, the scouting just ahead of time, to think about, is she going to be able to walk to the water? And we had to change scenes because she was like, I can't go all the way over there, one of the mothers. So there were things around just thoughtfulness, not just about the shots, but about how people are going to be taken care of. It's something I'm taking in with now, like getting to work on a feature film, that I'm like thinking about, how are we going to with the producers, how do we make space so that people are taken care of, and that we're considering their bodies and we're considering what it is to open into these spiritual experiences and to recover in a good way, and to account for that when we think about the money. Like, we're going to need time to recover. I would also—
It sounds like that would be your advice, is to make certain that you add more. I mean, I think there's always like the contingency part of the budget, right? But it sounds like you're talking almost more about an emotional contingency as well, right? In addition to that budget. So I think that's really wise, especially when we're dealing with a very challenging time in the world overall, that you need to leave more space for, you know, just anything, or you, or like you said, recovery or whatever, because you just don't know what way things might go.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Great. Well, Bronte, I can't thank you enough for taking the time in the midst of everything with the festival, but it's been really so great talking to you, because it's just, you know, it's just very cool to hear what you're doing and how you're leveraging film, you know, to kind of drive or create awareness, not only around social impact, but as that also intersects with spirituality. It's a very unique combo, and I, you know, wish you continued success with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Much.
Okay, everybody. So once again, you have been watching another episode of the Inside series here at film.io. And of course, stay tuned for the very next one. You know, nobody brings you inside of the minds of some of today's really hottest up and coming filmmakers, producers, and more than we do. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Lauren Delisa Coleman.